Welcome to the Aliographic Podcast and a created chat with Greg Broadmore and Nick Boshier, who are the creators together with Andy Lanning of One Path, an absolutely epic and brutal comic. Now, I'm Yurgi Urrutia from the Aliographic team, this wonderful group of volunteers who love comics and libraries. But before we get started with our special guests, as a national group based across the land we call Australia, we would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I would specifically like to acknowledge the Bunurong people as the custodians of the land from where I'm speaking, where I work, write, and draw. And I pay respect to the elders past and present of all First Nations people across the land and thank them for the rich storytelling traditions and art. We need truth-telling and treaty. Now, Greg Broadmore is an artist, writer, and game director from New Zealand, with lots of film credits in his career, including Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings and King Kong, and Neil Blomkamp's District 9, which is also among my favorite films, among others. Nick Boshier is an Australian actor, comedian, and writer, famous for being the actor behind Trent from Punchbowl and one of the creators of Bondi Hipsters. He's one of the writers of One Path, together with Greg and Andy Lanning. And I'm delighted to have Greg and Nick with me.
Howdy. Hey, everyone.
Cheers. Hello, everybody. Hi, Yogi. Lovely to meet you. Hi, Greg. Nice to see your smiling face yet again.
Good to see you again, man.
Glow.
And a
Good to see
beautiful
you.
wall of guitars.
That's right. And my
you
Rex,
play the guitar?
or my Albertosaurus, actually. Good boy.
Oh, yeah, that's
done.
beautiful also as well. Do you play the guitar?
I do, yeah. Oh, yeah, I've got like probably 20 guitars around here, and I actually, just before, it's a beautiful Sunday morning here in Wellington, and I was just sitting out on my back deck playing the guitar. That's what I do half of the time. I have played in a few bands over the years, but now I'm mainly focusing on writing and illustrating again.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, what kind of music do you play?
Good question. Punk rock and metal, I guess, is the probably easiest way to say it. I started, I love, what am I wearing? Dead Kennedys, right?
Yeah.
Noisy, loud, distortion, heavy. That's my thing.
I like it. Yeah, I grew up on punk and metal, so.
Oh, nice.
I can tell. I could have told you that, yeah.
Yeah.
You look like a wild one. Had a glint in your eye.
Excellent. Now, today we're here to talk about comics, though. So, and comics do take a long time to make. How is the publication of One Path going? It's just about to be published.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. It got delayed it was supposed to be out on April the 8th, and now it's out on April the 29th. And that is my fault because they sent me through proofs, and they very, very graciously, Mad Cave, my publisher, very, very graciously let me tutu with the prints to get the art and the quality of the print just so, which was really good of them. So I postponed it by a few weeks, apologies. But yeah, it will be all the better for it. So yeah, out in just, another couple of weeks, I would say, or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's looking very good.
Yeah, and hopefully it gets good reviews and publicity.
Hope so. I hope people dig it.
Because this is not your first comic, is it?
No, previously I've done many, many comics, but the ones that people may have seen that are published through HarperCollins and Dark Horse and others and Titan were the Dr. Broadmore's books, which are a series of books I did with through Weta Workshop, which use my ray guns and a whole world of sort of satirical science fiction. So I did a series, I think it was 4 books altogether with that.
Cool.
Brilliant. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. I mean, it's a brilliant series. And the guns. The
ray guns, there's plenty of ray guns in it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Excellent. Now, we will come back to One Path, but let's go back in time. So what's your relationship with comics? When did you get into comics, reading them and things like that? And maybe which ones as well, or which ones were your favorites?
Yeah, my connection with comics was basically through Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And in fact, I could go even back further in time, which is where Greg and I bonded on one path. Now, when I was a kid, I would stay with my grandparents in a place called Gunnedah, country New South Wales. And Dad, as a kid, had these books, and in these kind of, they were essentially like graphic books where they would have this. There was this period of fantasy and illustration where humans would be living alongside dinosaurs, and they were incredible because they'd have these dinosaur fights where T-Rex would be tearing the flesh out of the torso of a Stegosaurus, and there'd be First Nations folks or societies that would be living kind of around them. And that's where my imagination, I think, was first peaked in that kind of, in that graphic-y illustration world. But then, yeah, my introduction well and truly into graphic novels was, my initiation was probably through Grant Morrison and The Invisibles. And we'll probably talk about that maybe a little bit later, but that blindsided me. I never considered myself an artist until I left school in the late 90s, and then when I came across that soon thereafter, it knocked me out. And so that kind of was my personal primer, and I became obsessed with him and still am, and that graphic novel series and that aesthetic and the breadth of storytelling and that Matrix period, very formative time. Yeah,
he is an amazing writer. He really is.
You don't have the Matrix without Grant Morrison. You just don't. And yeah, it really is astonishing on every single level.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
How about
What was
you,
the series
Greg?
again? Sorry, just Nick. What was the series you were talking about that you saw when you were very, very young? Do you remember the name of it?
It wasn't actually a series. It was just Dad's books as a kid that were
Gotcha.
in his that were on his shelf, and so I'd go there. Obviously, he hadn't been there for a million years, and I just pull out these old books.
Yeah.
And just dinosaurs fighting around civilizations.
Yeah.
And we did bond on that. And it wasn't a graphic novel series. It was more just like a picture book. I couldn't recall, but you had that old hardback 1950s feel and aesthetic. And yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I love those sort of adventure annuals. When I was a kid, I discovered all that stuff because that meme of dinosaurs and humans, right? It's been around forever. As soon as we discovered dinosaurs, we imagine ourselves alongside them, right? You can't help it. You want to know. So it's the basis for Jurassic Park, but 100 stories or 1,000 stories before it. So you can't help but go there, right? Because they're the most primitive and most savage and most primal thing we can almost imagine, right?
Yeah.
And then we want to imagine ourselves alongside it. Like, what does that mean? There's potential in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And in and amongst that, there were I guess the era was the 50s and 60s. So it wasn't that long after a lot of seafaring. And so the other books were like massive ships getting enveloped by krakens and going through shipwrecks and being busted up against rocks. And just like, I really thought sea travel issue would be more of an issue in my life, given how much I saw it as a kid. I was like, this is something I've got to fucking deal with,
Yeah.
like that and
Krakens.
Quicksand.
Yeah, krakens and quicksand.
Quicksand, yes. Yeah, definitely.
And then maybe fighting a guanji every now and then. Yeah. My life with comics, I grew up in a small town in New Zealand, and there weren't really many comic books. There's a magazine store in town, but I very luckily got access to comics through my grandfather. He was a refugee from Poland, escaped from the war, but he ended up working at the paper mill. We had a local paper mill. That's where most everyone in my small town worked. And magazine stores back then, I'm sure that's probably still the same today. If you couldn't sell a magazine or a comic book or whatever, not that there were many comic books, you tear off the cover and you send the cover back to the distributor to get some money back. And they would send the books to the paper mill to get recycled. So my granddad would bring me back like big clutches of books, of comic books mainly, because that's what he knew what I loved. So I discovered all kinds of comic books, really varied stuff. So it would be Batman and Archie and Spider-Man and all that kind of stuff. I had no idea what it was. I didn't even know which comics I was reading because the covers weren't on them. So it was just random, like what's Granddad brought home today. He would also throw them away equally quickly. Like I would get them and be like, this comic is amazing, might blow my mind. And then I would go back a day later, a couple of days later to get that comic book and like, where is it? No, I didn't ever actually know, but what
Wow.
it was my granddad, because he didn't have a material mind in the way that I did. He just
Yeah.
throw them away. He just get rid of
Right.
them. They'd be in the fire is what they were. They were some sort of transient kind of entertainment for me, and he didn't think if they had any value. But that traumatized me to this day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
In the
seem
state I'm in.
still seem affected.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I am.
and you've
And
hoarded guitars as a result.
That's right. But anyway, that's my connection with comics, and from there discovered so many others. I love Mad Magazine as a kid. That was probably one of the things I loved the most, and Cracked and all those things. Later,
Tintin,
Tintin. Oh yeah, Tintin and Asterix.
Asterix and Obelix. In fact, now I think about it, I used to, as a kid, I found 30 or 40 Asterix and Obelix books, and I'd have nightmares as a kid. I think because very young, I watched RoboCop almost every day after school before my
How old
parents
were
got
you?
home. Yeah, pretty young,
Yeah.
I'd say. Too young for RoboCop. And
I
so
snuck into the theater to see RoboCop. I
oh,
would have been 12,
we,
I think.
I had an older brother and we had a VHS, and still, I'm sure this, I
The
still
hand, remember
can.
when his hand gets shotgunned?
But when he
Yeah.
kind of comes out of the toxic waste, he's like,
Oh,
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah. That scene is so brutal. Yeah, I was way too young as well when I watched it. I there was a bar that had this arcade game that I was totally obsessed with,
yeah.
and I went into the bar to play that game, and they were playing the movie on the
Huh.
TV, and it was just that moment,
Yeah.
the toxic waste and all that. And I was just, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. What's this? And I just sat down and started watching the movie. I watched all the rest.
Yeah. From that point on, my God, that's the most brutal part of the movie.
Yeah.
so
I was
brutal.
like,
Actually, except for
whoa.
that initial phase where the criminals all blast into pieces, that's pretty heavy. That's the part
Yeah.
that blew my mind in the theater, was when they're basically gunning him on the ground or whatever and shooting
Yeah.
his hand and torturing him. It's like, holy hell.
Well, the bit that haunted me, and this is astonishing filmmaking, is the horror in broad daylight of that machine is like, you've got 5 seconds to comply. It's like, that's
8209.
horror in real time, in real daylight in a conference. That was not a
Mhm.
theater of war or horror that I was familiar with at all. And how
Yeah.
impossible that thing was to reason with. I was like, this is
Yeah.
not okay. But as
Yeah.
a result of watching RoboCop too much, I used to lay out all my Asterix and Obelix comics on top of my bed and sleep on top of them because they made me feel better.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, it's cute.
I have to say, out of the Tintin Asterix, divide, I've always been in the Asterix team.
I didn't
I
know
was
there was a
totally-
divide.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Among my friends, there was the Tintin camp and the Asterix
Oh
camp.
my God.
Oh, that would have been a bloody battle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have that divide. I had Atari versus Commodore. That was my
Yes.
divide.
Yeah. That's another one.
We just had skins and shirts.
Yeah.
So,
I should name a couple of other influences though before we continue on. I have to
Yeah.
put in like 2000 AD. That's probably when I discovered actually Starlog first, which was a sort of a precursor of 2000 AD. And was it Starlog? No, I think that's a science fiction magazine. Star-Lord, sorry. Which would have been sort of late 70s or something like that. I discovered those comics. And the whole British attitude towards comics and the way they wrote, that caught me at the right time. So up till that point, I was more interested in probably in the art. And I've always been interested in the art as an artist, but once I hit 2000 AD, then you've got all these sort of social issues, but also satirical writing, approaches to character that were different. All the American comics I'd read, which I loved, had heroic characters, right, without flaws. And then when you land in 2000 AD, you've got Judge Dredd, and you are supposed to. Judge Dredd is more like Charles Bronson or Dirty Harry, right? Where it's like this is not a broken character, but a character you're supposed to question. Like, am I supposed to like this character? Are they actually the good guy? Right? There's a real tension in there that you still don't see in many movies anymore. And I love that you don't know whether you have a profound connection to the character because of how powerful they are, but you also think there's something wrong with them. There's something broken potentially. I find that
Yes.
tension really interesting. And that was in 2000 AD, and in a lot of the British comics that I read that I didn't realize was even a theme that you could have. I probably started reading those when I was 13, 14. So the right age to sort of come across more complex kind of ways of looking at fiction.
Yeah, definitely. Because I love Judge Dredd, but if you totally agree with him and all his actions, I would worry about you.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the comic, though, I think, is to
Yeah.
ride that tension, right?
Yeah,
I-
absolutely.
Judge Dredd was something I actually, like, I'm getting all this recall now. Judge Dredd is something I used to read quite a bit, and I don't remember the morality. I just remember the visuals were just so flipping compelling. Like,
Mhm.
who and what is this guy? And his name, Judge Dredd. Holy smokes,
Hmm.
that's a
Yeah.
terrifying egg.
Yeah. But yeah, 2000 AD has incredible artists as well. So they've always had incredible artists.
And a variety of artists, too. That was the amazing thing about 2000 AD and Judge Dredd is you'd have a different artist almost every few weeks coming through, which kept the whole thing very fresh and interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Now, Greg, you've done lots of things in your career as an artist, including playing in bands. Now I find out. um, uh, what's your origin story with comics? At what point did you decide, yeah, I want to draw a comic?
Well, we're going back to the same point in time that we were just discussing. I mean, I think I wanted to draw comics as soon as I saw them. So, I mean, like I was saying with my grandfather bringing back comics, I would get these comics and be amazed. And then the next thing I would do is sit down with crayons and cardboard. That's the other benefit of having a granddad that worked at the paper mill. Is he'd bring me back, cardboard and paper. And so I'd sit there with crayons drawing these scenes. I also was fascinated with World War II and so on. So I'm drawing like massive battle scenes. And of course, if I'm honest, my battle scenes usually had tanks and soldiers fighting dinosaurs. So, I basically have been riffing on the same memes for a while. Yeah, and so
Nothing wrong with that.
oh no, totally, man. There's infinite well there to go down. The So yeah, and then I think I really probably didn't do a professional comic. I wanted to do comics for 2000 AD once I discovered that was a thing, and I do remember sending a folio away into the void. This is back in the days before the internet, so I did a bunch of artwork. I didn't even realize you could photocopy it. It was probably before that was a thing, so I sent my original artwork in the mail off to various people in the UK and never heard a peep. So, and being in New Zealand, it's a small country that at the time would have been 3.5 million people. So I just thought, well, that you don't really do art or creativity as a job. It's not really a thing you do here. So actually, I was unemployed for the longest time, and but eventually I did move to Wellington, which is where I live now, and I started making a few of my comics just in a more lo-fi kind of way and getting them out there. And I did a comic called Killer Robots Will Smash the World, which was really not a story. It was me sort of being inspired by Jeff Darrow, another huge inspiration of mine. Drawing dinosaurs actually in Wellington where I live, causing mayhem. And the story is really, it's not really a story. It's like, I want to see a dinosaur going through Wellington causing carnage.
Yeah.
It's like a Godzilla films. I love Godzilla films, right? I love them to bits. But to be honest, I love the 15 minutes of Godzilla films where Godzilla is destroying everything. That's the part I actually like. I could do without the other hour where the people talking heads, like I could just edit that out. Thank you. So I made the comic of that where I'm like, I'm just going to do the 15 minutes of Godzilla films that I'm actually interested in.
Yeah. That's awesome. So and then somehow you ended up working at Weta as a concept artist. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was unemployed for like 7 years in a row, and I'd envisioned. I'm not joking. I envisioned my life sleeping under a bridge.
The life
That's
of
pretty
an
much.
artist.
Yeah, you There was no way. Like especially, you imagine New Zealand. There's a few more people in Australia. Is very very similar culturally. But economically, New Zealand is even more in the past. Like, there's just not enough people to have a local art scene or anything like that. Anyone that's doing art here is doing it pure for love, And I'm sure that's very similar where you guys come from. But so it was a miracle to me actually when the Lord of the Rings films came out. And that's just all tribute to Peter Jackson, that he had the strength of will and the talent, and all of those factors to make those films that he was making and do them in New Zealand. So it was a bit of a revelation. And so I was actually living in Wellington at the time, making comics on the side, but actually working in a video game store to try and to pay the rent. And the first Lord of the Rings film came out, and it was like we were talking about before. It was an utter revelation. It's like I'd loved his films, Bad Taste and Brain Dead and so on, and I knew that they were great and they were fun. But I did not see the jump from those films, as amazing as they were, to the thing that became Lord of the Rings. I was like, and that's when I realized. Right. Yeah. And that's when I realized maybe they employ people like me. Maybe they employ people who want to sit down and draw things from their imagination, who tell stories visually. That maybe there's a job. So I immediately put together a little folio of actually with dinosaurs, ray guns and robots in it, and sent it through to Weta Workshop. And very, very luckily got a job, and I've been there ever since, 20 something years now. Yeah.
I can imagine them receiving that portfolio and being like, oh, wow, this guy's in Wellington? Excellent. Let's employ him right now.
Wasn't quite like that. Richard Taylor runs Weta Workshop. He's an absolutely incredible, generous person and sees potential, but I don't think I was anywhere near good enough to work there, right? But I think he saw the potential. He saw that I was clearly dedicated, and he definitely values tenacity and, and heart above everything else, like really wanting to do something. I always have the saying, and I think Richard would agree with it, you never let talent get in the way of ambition, right? I want to do things, and I don't care if I'm not qualified to do them or not. If I have a vision, I want to make it happen. So, and he employs people with that same kind of attitude. And so very luckily for me, he must have seen my moxie and let me, and gave me a chance. And I actually thought I was on a 2-week contract, and I'm still on a 2-week contract to this day. I thought every week I'm going to be fired. I'll be out of here. So I'm just clawing my way along, going, please, I need to stay. I need to stay in this job because this is the best job in the universe.
Right. So going to you, Nick. So you're an actor and writer, right?
Yeah.
And so how did this happen? And suddenly Greg, lures you into, I'm making a comic and you want to collaborate with me.
What Weta is to Greg is to me.
Yeah.
Then I'll kind of recount the story. I think I got in touch with Greg simply because of his ray guns and his illustrations, and I looked Greg up, went down the rabbit hole, saw that he was in Weta, and I was doing a trip to New Zealand and caught up with Greg. And Greg is, I mean, you obviously know, it's one of the most astonishing artists I've ever come across. But at the time when we met, Greg was very much a part of Magic Leap, and I found Greg's capacity to toggle between the technical and the artistic, well, A, brilliant, but B, quite exciting, because often there's a distinction between those two, the sciences and the engineering, and then the arts is over here. Whereas what Weta and Greg really exemplifies is the fact what happens when both of that technical, scientific, engineering ability is enmeshed with the same level of artistry. So anyhow, I met Greg at that time, and then I just became I was initially a fan and very lucky to become friends. And then as a result of that, we just started jamming. I had also created an animated series called Beach Daz, which is just a pokey little online animated series that did fairly well. It's based on 2 Kiwi characters, and I was trying to troubleshoot a series and longer form animated series that I was writing. And in fact, I remember calling Greg. I was sitting in a cemetery in one of my favorite little spots near where I lived, and this might have not been the first call, but it was a call. I was like, Greg, I've got this series. Here's the concept, space junk recyclers. I just don't know if they should be the Beach Daz characters. And Greg, if he was in front of me, he would have looked into the whites of my eyes and he said, bro, they've got to be the Beach Daz characters. It's got to be. And so I was so lucky that Greg did a bit of concept art that governed now what the aesthetic of the show hopefully will become. And then in and amongst that, Greg said, "Hey, I'm working on this graphic novel series." At the time, it was a different name, which became One Path, and we started jamming, and it was just one of the most creatively stimulating experiences because, like I said, Greg's brain is not just a dude with crayons and a piece of cardboard. It's like, just even jamming with him, you get this great breadth of creative potential. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, Greg, how did the idea for One Path originate?
Yeah, I'll paint a little picture of what, again, how we kind of met, and just to put more color in there, because we haven't talked about it yet, but I was, as Nick was saying, I worked with Weta Workshop and a company called Magic Leap. Magic Leap, if you might not know about, but they're a very fucking interesting company. They're from Florida, and they raised an enormous amount of money to make mixed reality goggles. This is sort of when they started, it was before VR had started to sort of come up. And the idea was mixed reality. I don't know if many people know that term, but the idea is that you can create computer visuals that can be in the real world. So you have a device that can look at the real world, make sense of it, build up a 3D reconstruction, and put the visuals into the world. This guy approached us in about 2012, and we started making. I instantly got the vision. It's a crazy science fiction idea of having fictitious worlds I saw coexisting in our real world. What if video games could jump off of a flat screen and into the world with us? And so we started making games with them. When we started, the technology was almost not there. He just had a bunch of very clever people and the sort of technical framework for how it would be done. And my job on the artistic side, along with the team I started to build, was to provide use cases for what the technology could be from a creative and a game development kind of point of view. So I had never made games before, and I started making games, and I ended up making 2 games that were published. And actually this is very sad, but right at the they still weren't a commercially viable thing. They'd raised almost $5 billion in funding. That's with a B. So a great deal of funding, but it requires even more. Like, just to put that in context, Meta, Facebook, have probably put $100 billion into that same project and still don't have a product they can sell to the public. So Magic Leap were well ahead of the curve of this kind of technology, doing interesting stuff, but it wasn't quite there commercially. They still needed more funding. And then COVID hit, right? And at the moment of COVID hit, if you were in the world of venture capital and so on, all the money disappeared from speculative projects and went into like the basics, as you would understand. It's going to go into television production because everyone's at home. It's going to go into traditional video game creation because everyone's going to home. It's going to go into the sort of staples. And that's what it did. All that money flowed that way. It just sort of dried up. So overnight, at the moment of COVID, I had 3 other game projects in development. That is gone. They'll never be seen by the public ever. And one was almost entirely finished. It wasn't a huge game. It was the world's first multiplayer mixed reality game. But it's gone. And so it was utterly crushing. Utterly, man. I can tell. I've got a team of 60 people, and then suddenly we're making half of them redundant the next week. So that was a real life-changing moment. I'm still getting over it, as you could probably tell. But luckily, one of the people I'd met during that journey was Andy Lanning. He was a creative at Magic Leap as well, and so we bonded over comics. And I just met Nick, who came over and visited and saw what I was doing there. And suddenly we were all at home with COVID, and so metaphorically, my brain was like, I'm going back into the cave. I'm going back, into my little world. And I realized that I didn't want to make. I can't make these sort of high-tech games anymore, and I don't really want to take a step back and just do console games or something like that. I decided to really take a massive step back and go like, what can I do on my own with my own hands? And so I started thinking of this of the One Path world, the Cave Girls world, and so metaphorically, it made a lot of sense to me. It's the primal ingredients about things coming back to basics, and it's something I'd wanted to explore for a very long time. And then, luckily for me, Andy Lanning was like, "Hey, we should make a comic. Now we've got nothing to do. We're both at home. Let's make a comic." And Nick's talking about the same thing. Hey, what are you up to? Well, I'm doing this. What do you want to do? Some other stuff together? And so basically, Andy's in the UK, so in the evenings I'm on the phone to him, talking sort of structurally around this book. And in the morning, when our times lined up, me and Nick are on the phone, and we're just talking. Me and Nick would be talking about big metaphysical kind of ideas, and you're talking about the Odyssey and the Iliad before. We're talking about this kind of archetypical, fictitious ideas, and we basically my entire day between these other two, us three creatives, was just figuring out this world of One Path, what it could be. And the book slowly formed out of that.
That's awesome. And so, and once you start drawing, what's your process? So do you start with pencils? Do you do everything digitally?
Once I'd written it, and then and then blocked it out. There's a great deal of process between writing, just writing out the raw ideas and actually getting to something that's actually plotted out that I can start to illustrate. Once I'd got something, and that actually probably took 6 months, I think, or more, maybe, writing the book out. And Andy was the guy that really helped me to block it out into something, because Andy is the comics maestro. He could take the raw ideas that we'd come up with and put them into, paginate them and make them into issues, and and they'll do that kind of work. Then I sit down and I start using pencil. I do pencils. I try and do them as fast as possible. And then normally, when I first started doing comics, I would move on to pen and ink or acrylic paint after that. But for this, because I've been working at Workshop for years, I use Photoshop. And Photoshop is wonderful because you don't have to wait for the paint to dry. So so I do this process in pencils on A3 pages, then scan it in, and then do them in Photoshop from there.
So One Path is a really epic and brutal comic. Let's be honest. It is. It's a pretty brutal world. You obviously like a bit of gore as well. I can see 2000 AD influence there. I was listening to some metal while I was reading it. It felt like the right score.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about the comic quite a bit, but maybe you can tell a little bit in your words, either of you, what's the world of One Path and what can we expect? Because obviously the story doesn't end in the first volume.
Well, I've been blathering for a bit, so I should let Nick jump in. But just very quickly on that point of metal being a soundtrack, I have actually got a playlist. I've got a playlist for season 1 of One Path and book 1, and I've got a playlist for book 2, and I'll make another book season for the other books when they come out. And that's literally the music I listen to while I'm illustrating. And so I should share it with you. I'd love to share it with people, because there's probably a bunch of really interesting music in there that really does fit. It's the literal soundtrack of creation of the book, and I think it'll fit really well. So
put the playlist on your website.
Yeah, it's on YouTube Music. I don't have Spotify, so if someone wants to make a Spotify version of it, that would be much appreciated. But yeah, I'll share the YouTube version of it.
Cool. Nick?
Well, I mean, One Path, and Greg should, tell you the origin story, because One Path is very much Greg's universe, his art, his idea. I just happen to have been at the right place at the right time to be let into his world. But what I guess Greg and I bonded on a lot as it related to One Path was, okay, so you've got, a tribe of women of various ages living alongside and in some senses coexisting with dinosaurs. It is fascinating. It is big. It's gory. It's all that kind of stuff. But Greg mentioned at some point about some of the mythology that is yet to necessarily be elaborated on in this first volume, but that's where he and I really bonded. And so some of the mythology, and Greg, you stop me if I'm kind of letting any cats out of the bag. However, this small tribe, they're only women, and they obviously don't procreate as a result, but they're gifted. And Greg, am I okay to continue?
Yeah, go for it, man. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
I'll not beeping you out in real time if I think it's wrong. I'll just make this sound.
Okay, no, not just wrong, but if I'm kind of like spoiler alert.
Yeah. No, whatever you feel.
They're gifted a child. Again, this is all Greg's universe. And so when this small tribe are gifted a child, obviously certain instincts kick in, all survival instincts to protect the young, etc. But where Greg and I really bond is like, where the fuck does that kid come from? And why? And when Greg said that, we then went down on this rabbit hole of like, well, what are the systems that are in place that are drip feeding kids to this to these tribes. And what happens as a result? And is it some kind of sick fucking game? And where I am personally really interested in, you know, you could call it spiritual, I guess, is that I'm quite interested in the Gnostic idea of our reality, that we exist in some kind of like prison planet, in inverted commas, that very matrix idea of our reality, which one path really, like, you rang all those bells for me. And then those rabbit holes that those metaphysical rabbit holes that Greg and I would go down are very much based on, okay, well, what are the arbiters of this insane reality that this tribe of girls and women are stuck in? And given how immediate their need for survival is, they're living alongside dinosaurs. It's very hand to mouth, to say the least. They're so in survival mode. They would not have a capacity at all to think about what exists outside of their immediate needs. I found that super flipping interesting. So I've talked about maybe some of the framework of the universe, but again, that's very much as a result of the world that Greg had created. So it's probably for Greg to lean into.
Yeah, that to me is the interesting tension again. Of the story is kind of about technology or change, right? In a way, it's like, what if you've got a world in which people are barely surviving, they're clinging on, which of course has been our reality in many epochs prior, right?
Yeah.
And then someone has the idea to change everything, right? Or to change some fundamental aspect of their lives, and that person could unlock great potential, and they can see the potential that it can unlock. But it also it upsets the delicate balance that holds their lives, together. And so the story is kind of about that. And then, of course, because back in that world, the world's held together by myths that aren't necessarily true, right? They're just the best story they have for the world that they're in, and it's incredibly fragile. And again, a world where nature is exemplified by these brutal animals that could give a fuck about them, that only see them as the source of food. And they want to break free from that. And I almost want to talk about the act of creating fiction like this, because it is I think it's kind of different and interesting. I'm not going to talk about the story necessarily, because hopefully you'll read the story and you'll understand it from that.
Yeah.
But the act of making the story, I think, is interesting. First of all, there's the three ingredients of me, Andy, and Nick, and bouncing ideas around. And Nick is, like he says, very much about myths and throwing out like these touch points that connect like neurons together of like, this myth, and because you're actually trying to find truth, right? What I think that's what fiction is all about, is trying to find truth or point towards it. And so when you're creating a story like this, you're clutching at all the possible ideas to try and synthesize a new idea. And the way I approach this story, and luckily for me, Andy and Nick were very, I think probably feel a similar way, or at least very accommodating of it, is that I don't write a story with an end in mind, or I don't arrive at the end and then retro-engineer the rest of the story. I try and be in the cockpit as much of the time as possible, which is to say, your imagination conjures up these possibilities, and then you start moving forward, and then you're like, what would happen from here? What would happen from here? And then the story kind of goes on its way. It's not that you don't reach forward into time to find out where it might arrive, but you're not focusing on that. You're trying to surf, you're trying to ride, you're trying to drive the machine and see where it will go. And so this is the beautiful thing about working with Nick, is we can throw in ideas and then grab onto them. Yeah, and if that is true, then this happens, and then this happens, and it's not. I kind of view this two. If we want to be bipolar about it, there's two ways to create a story. There's one is to really be in this mode of surfing, right? Driving the machine in the moment, being the Formula One driver, reacting to every corner and reacting to every movement of the other drivers, and just being in the moment. And then there's the planning forward, which I view as more, I don't want to be too pejorative, but it's more fairy tales and propaganda, which are both great. I love fairy tales and I love propaganda, which is to say, I've got a story I want to tell. I've got a message I want the audience to receive. right? And therefore, to make them receive this message, I'm going to construct the story just so, right? I see the end, and then I'm going to build it just this way. Both are fine. Both. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but this is definitely in the moment, right? I actually don't know where the story is going to go. I don't know where the characters are going to land. I don't even know who's good and bad necessarily. I can sit back above the story and go like, I relate to this character in this moment, but I relate to this other character in this other moment. I think it's a very exciting place to be, and it means that I don't really know what will happen. I do know what will happen now, by the way, because I've written all the stories and I'm illustrating them. But that creation, that is in that mode, if you like.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I think it does end up being like a fairy tale, but I think that mode personally, if I am to advocate for it, I think does get you closer to truth, because the other mode of trying to be more propagandistic or fairy tale is to say that you know what the best outcome in the world is, right? It's I know what the right outcome is, and I'm going to try and engineer the situation to be towards that. Whereas the other mode of being in the moment and driving and surfing, that is being honest that like you don't actually know, and maybe you will never know. You can only point in the most honest direction and the most truthful direction that you possibly can. And to elaborate more on that, it's not necessarily more honest or more truthful. It's just more profound. Like, what do you feel more than anything else? When your imagination throws up possible avenues for the story to go down, it's your emotions that are going to tell you which one is the right one, right? You're going to feel it the most. And that might not be a good feeling. That might not be like, oh, that makes me feel happy. It might be the thing that makes you feel most despondent, right? But it's the most powerful emotion that can happen is the one that will lead you down the various conjecture, down the various theory you have about where it could go.
It's always really interesting to hear how different people write, because you're right. There are the people who plan everything and who know exactly where the story is going to go and everything, and then there's the people who just go with it and see. They have an idea, or they start with an idea or a character or a situation, and just see where this takes me and where the characters take me. One of my favorite authors as well is Ursula Le Guin, who is right there, all the artsy books, and she always said that that's the way she wrote. She had no idea where the story was going. She just had a concept of a planet, or a concept of a planet where people actually don't have a gender. They have both genders, and they actually change. And where does this story take me?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's fascinating.
I think there's something. I always bring this analogy back to science and technology, because I think all forms of creativity are actually much closer than we think. In fact, I think they're fundamentally all the same. There might be technical differences between how you do them, but they're generally the same. I mean, when you're Einstein, right, and you're coming up with relativity, that is not like knowing where you want to arrive. That's like kind of, Newton's got this idea, right, and it's kind of right, but it's kind of wrong. And he would actually have to shift the frame entirely from his way of thinking to come up with a new theory, a new conjecture that solves the entire problem of what Newton was stating, but actually not in the same way, in a totally new way. I think they're really parallel like that. And so you have to arrive at something that's not saying that what Einstein's version of reality is true, because of course it's been superseded as well, right? In very, very many details and at a higher level. So, but that way of thinking, of shifting the frame, that only comes from being like honest that you don't really know, and there might be a different way of looking at it, which I love. But by the way, and I should come back, I don't think anyone's bipolar and they're doing, well, maybe there are some examples of people that are doing extremely one way and extremely the other. I don't know. But I think you can go backwards and forwards between these modes of thinking, and it's probably necessary, especially the bigger the production you make, the more you kind of need to lean into the aiming, like I need to arrive over here, right, to plan a bit into the future. That's the beauty about comic books, by the way, and graphic novels, is you can be closer to that raw sort of surfing form of being honest, as honest as you can be, and being in the moment as you can be. I think that it just allows it because of the nature of the medium.
Yeah. So the first volume is out now, or pretty much, probably when this podcast will be out, it will be out. But there's more to the story. Do you know how many volumes it's going to be, more or less? Or
Yeah, it is going to be 4 books, and they should be out over the next 4 years.
Okay.
There'll be one every year. So I'm working on the second book at the moment, and then as soon as I finish that, I've got no time. I've given myself a brutal schedule. I've got 2 weeks holiday every year, but I've basically got to be drawing every single day for the next 3 years.
1 year sounds pretty brutal for drawing.
It's fun though. I do love it. It's
Yeah.
intense. It's so much work, and I agonize over every panel. But I love it, man. Coming back to that analogy, I don't even surf, so it's probably I'm probably being silly making this analogy, but it is like surfing. I love making the comic, and you're doing the drawings. You're really, I do it for the joy of that. It's just solving the problem of trying to get a visual out of your head and onto the page. I've been doing it now my entire life, 50 more years, and I'm still I still find it both joyful and agony. And it's the writing of that wave that is so much fun.
Cool. So how about you, Nick? Is the story all written? You know it's going to be 4 books, but is the story all written, or are you still writing it?
Oh well, Greg's very much in the pilot seat on the surfboard. Whatever analogy you want to use in terms of the story at the moment. When we worked together on it, we did talk about obviously the nature of the first series, and then also what the universe looked like and what would happen therein. So it's very much drawing phase at the moment, and and very much that. What I would like to add, actually, just to skip back half a question, is I think for One Path and maybe other stories that I'm quite fond of, there tends to be a couple of parallels of storytelling or of truth. There's what the characters are saying and doing, then what's actually what the story is saying. So in this instance, this tribe is living in a false reality, you could say. And then there's, again, let me know if I'm breaching any kind of spoilers, Greg. There's one character that's broadly becomes more and more in disagreement with the nature of that reality. So we're following her actions. We're following what the characters are doing very much as Greg characterized. But then what's the story actually alluding to from a fable or a myth or an archetype point of view? And that's something that I know Greg and I spoke about quite a lot about this particular story, the stories that we love, the Invisibles and the Matrix. Like, you're in a world and it's that hero's journey myth that we all know, but you're in a false reality that you actually have to broadly become totally in disagreement with. And it causes all kinds of chaos, certainly in a fucking tribe where you're living alongside dinosaurs. And that, to me, is a nourishing part of either reading or writing some stories, is that you can actually, through these characters, exemplify what we all should do to an extent. I just wanted to add that just as a little nugget to the previous question, because I think that's something that Greg naturally does. He's in the cockpit, but obviously there's a broader thing that Greg orientates toward. But when there's a drawing, artistic, and actually putting words on the page phase, you're obviously surfing. But then there's that bigger stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. So, and do you have any other project, Nick, that you can talk about, or?
Yeah, well, one that Greg was there at the very beginning, and will be again. I'm in development with the ABC and BBC on an animated series at the moment. So very much in the early days of the hours on the tools. Just delivered the first draft of the first script on Friday. Very early days, overwritten powerfully. I take massive swings narratively so I can, so the network can get shocked early.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, there'll be some real head scratches in there for the network. We have a animated whale in a void seeing the universe crack through an egg. So, and that's a kids show. So, that's where I'm at. If you must know, but that's what I'm doing at the moment. Also, just finished draft 0 of a feature script, and then also starting to write up another graphic novel, which I'm probably about a year into and have about 70, maybe 80 years to go. Yeah, to get that done.
I want
It's
to hear
very
more
much
about that.
in the fantasy realm. It started off as a small story. I thought, oh, this would be a nice message about fucking litter, using this girl character that was an imaginary friend of my mum that I've kind of written up. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to write this about litter. Cut to a year later and literally about 120 pages of prose. And I haven't necessarily even cracked like the inciting incident yet. So that's where I'm.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to some of those projects coming out.
Yeah, Greg, don't be surprised. You may be getting a call soonish on that story. That's a real another head scratcher, mate.
Oh, it sounds exciting. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, at the end, we always ask our guests to recommend a couple of titles, a couple of comics that they love. Like it can be all-time favorites or comics that influenced one path, or anything you read recently and you really love and want other people to read, whatever way you want to take it. So maybe we'll start with Greg.
Sure. Yeah, we were talking before at the start of the show. I have to show it just because I've got it here, and I love it. But this was a massive influence on me. Slane, Simon Bisley's and Pat Mills' work. That was a huge influence on me as a kid. I remember, I always tell this story. I was really into 2000 AD as a young kid, and I thought I could be a 2000 AD artist. And I looked at the other artists and thought, oh, okay, they're amazing, they're better than me, but I have a chance. I could get there. And so I was starting to put together some work, and then Simon Bisley came out, and it was just like the ceiling was here, and then the ceiling rose like hundreds of meters into the air, and it's still an aspiration to this day. I feel utterly inspired by that book. So whenever I want to feel inspired but humiliated, I pick up that book, and I recommend if anyone wants to pick up some of the best comic book artwork in the universe. Simon Bisley,
when I
the Horn
discovered
Book.
Simon Bisley, same thing. It just blew my mind totally.
Yeah,
and I read everything I could of his.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I'm not being like to what's coming out now. I have no idea. I don't keep up with the latest. I just find like things that I absolutely love and get inspired by. Another huge inspiration is Jeff Darrow. I've been lucky enough to get to know Jeff a little bit, and I have a bunch of his artworks original artworks around my house. But his work as well, that was another thing. It's very, very different. You couldn't get more different. Jeff Darrow's probably a little bit inspired by Mobius and other artists like that. They got that hyper detailed pen work style. Oh man, I recommend go and get all his books right now.
Yeah, well, my favorite comic book artist of all time is Moebius. But yeah, when I read Hard Boiled, oh my god, that comic is just incredible.
Nick, have you read Hard Boiled?
I have not,
dude. Go.
Just went to town in that one. It's just
type in Jeff Darrow to Amazon or whatever. Jeff with one F. Dude, his books are unbelievable. You will love them.
It's going to happen.
It's
I'm spending your money for you. Sorry.
It is going to happen. No, please.
The detail in that comic is just incredible, and then everything else. But that was the first one that I encountered. Excellent. How about you, Nick?
For me, Invisibles potentially. Like I mentioned before, might well have changed my life. Grant Morrison's Invisible series, just it's essentially how he refers to it as like it's a working sigil as a book, which is to say it's a charged magical piece. He being the base of the lead character, King Mob. He obviously wrote all his experiences, and he had some pretty psychedelic out there, off-world experiences as an individual, and also a lot of magical experience and magical practice that he then spilled into the work. And the character of King Mob, as a reflection of himself, became something of essentially like a voodoo doll, because whatever happened to him as a character of King Mob happened to Grant Morrison in life. Like when the character became unwell in the comic book series, he himself became unwell with a very similar ailment. Like to me, it showed not only the potential of that storytelling, but also the true potency of story. It's not just telling a tale or a hero's journey. It actually animates the world. You know, a line in a poem has had poets jailed and have caused revolutions. Like, there is so much potential potency in storytelling, and he truly exemplifies that in a really modern kind of way. And then there's other series like the Last Mad series and Descendants. Those two graphic novel series just knocked my socks off. The Last Man in particular really got me. Anyhow, that's pretty much my breakdown. Like, Grant Morrison is so my vibe, because I do like that. The myths. I am interested in Western chaos magic. I'm interested in Gnosticism. I'm interested in those old religions and, you know, mystical Christianity and all that stuff. I really, really love it. Yeah.
Right.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys for joining me. And I hope One Path does really, really well. And I look forward to book 2.
Thank you. Well,
thanks so much.
hey, man.
Thanks for your
Cheers,
time.
Reggie.